Okay, so this People in Journalism project has two units attached. So one of them is the photojournalism, which is quite a big unit. It's a two credit one, and it's one that is mandatory for going on to HND. So you have to have that in order to pass an HND. But the other unit that is combined into this project is social photography. And I just wanted to give you a little introduction of social photography, but it's kind of biased towards my view of social photography, because I did do quite a lot of social photography back in the day. So social photography is just about anything really, which is the retail end of commercial photography. So it's the way of making a living out of being a photographer, um, um, but doing it as a retail photographer. Um, so working for the public rather than for companies or for magazines or for newspapers. And it's generally thought of as the most important aspects, not generally thought of, but the most important and probably most money spinning aspects of social photography are weddings and family portraits. And there are lots of different ways of doing them. Um, I really My practice really was is has always been a fine art photographer. I've always done fine art photography, but I've made my living usually doing journalistic photography, so photojournalism, documentary photography, magazine editorial photography. Um, uh, Sometimes, on occasions, I did do advertising photography in the studio, but most of my practice has been as a documentary photographer, or as a photojournalist, or as a magazine photographer. Round about the time when digital photography arrived with us, lots of the magazine work and lots of the newspaper work started to dry up, or lower fees were paid anyway. And then eventually magazines and newspapers went more online, and had a slightly different um, business model, which meant fees dropped quite dramatically. A lot of photographers, me included, started making up our workload, trying to get income by doing social photography, and that was mostly weddings, and some portraiture as well. It was quite common. It happened around about the end of the 90s, early 2000s. I think some editorial photography has started to re-emerge, and started to pay better fees again. But a lot of editorial newspaper photographers did wedding photography and portraits as well. Um, this is quite a special picture from my point of view, because I think compositionally it's almost perfect, but it's one that was taken on the hoof big time. There's no way I was able to spend too much time composing this picture, um, but it is kind of almost perfect. And I've released a shutter just as the guy has released his confetti onto the couple. And it is the angles, it's the rule of thirds, all of that going on. I used to work with my son on wedding photography, and we did this wedding in Australia. We used to go all over the world doing weddings, and he got exactly the same moment, but from a different angle. But it just goes to show how, when you work with somebody, and when you know when the time is right, that's when you fire the shutter, the decisive moment, as Henri Cartier-Bresson would say. Josh got this picture. My son got this picture in Italy. It was a Jewish wedding. They're doing the chair dance. What's nice about this wedding was that the bride's family were Russian. And when the wall came down in 1989, the whole family, the whole extended family, being Jewish, left Russia, because the Jews were persecuted in communist Russia. And they left Russia, and they went to Italy initially, which is where we took this picture, in Tuscany, but then distributed all over the world. So One branch of the family went to Australia, another went to California, some to London. And these are two brothers. This is the bride's father and his brother, and they hadn't met for 25 years. This was the first meeting they'd come back together. One was living in Australia and one was living in California, and this was their first meeting back together. So you can see that's quite a special moment. So you might have noticed that a lot of the wedding photography I've shown you on here has been is in a documentary style. So I brought to wedding photography and portrait photography my skills that I'd learned as a documentary photographer and as a journalist, and I photographed weddings as a story. So I told the story from getting ready through to the celebrations in the evening. But some pictures were made posed. This is kind of semi-posed. So this is a moment where we went to the seafront, away from the reception area, and we made a set of pictures. You can see a sort of evening light, and we made a set of pictures just of the couple. So we let them do what they want to do, more or less. Gave them some instruction, but there were moments that were photographed. So it's not strictly posed in the formal sense. When we look at the portrait photography, you can see that it needs to be a little bit more posed. So this is one of those moments. This is the bride with her dad. The taller guy is her dad, and the vicar meeting them at the church door, ready to go in. And it is just it's a beautiful moment because she's lit and they're not, and it's just the way that the light has fallen. And that moment when they've just got married, and they say you can kiss the bride or whatever it is, and that's just captured from there. Longer lens. So in this case, I very rarely used to use very long lenses. We used to take an 80 to 200 millimeter lens with us on weddings. Josh used to call it our get out of jail free card. Which would be just in case we really needed it. We were stuck somewhere, we couldn't get closer. But I always preferred to use shorter lenses. This is an 85mm lens. I used to use 35 and 85 all the time throughout the wedding as much as possible, and we had a 24 and an 80 to 200 for backup, really. But it was mostly those two lenses that both of us used throughout the wedding. And this is the bride listening to the groom's speech. This is that Italy wedding again. So not all the pictures I did on weddings were in black and white, but black and white was very popular. And in the early days of taking wedding photographs, I did use black and white film quite a lot, and some of the pictures you've already seen were on film. But we also used colour. And certain pictures had to be in colour. So I quite liked this moment because this was in London in Islington, and I quite liked the way that the groom is staring at the guy who's wearing a colourful jumper, scarf and hat, as though he's looking a bit odd and out of place, and yet they're walking along dressed in wedding garb. I just quite like that as a moment. It's some of my knowledge of street photography and understanding of street photography, which is something that I do as a fine art photographer. Some of my knowledge as a documentary photographer comes into what I do as a wedding photographer. And this is a pose moment. So this is fairly carefully posed, whereas the first pose picture I showed you was I just said that we'd left them to get on with what they wanted to do. With this one, I've actually asked the guy to put his hand in his pocket. I've asked him to kiss. I've asked her to hold the flowers exactly where they are, and we've used the staircase as a leading line, and the rope handrail as leading lines. So it's a very carefully composed and posed image. And this is a moment of bride getting ready with her father looking on, looking proud. She's just checking herself. She's ready probably. Dad is just getting last minute finishes done, probably tiny tie or something, I don't know, by one of the bridesmaids. And this is from a first dance. So not posed. This is exactly as they were. We're moved in quite close on this. So I'm using an 85mm lens, but I've moved in quite close to get to fill the frame. So I'll show you some portraiture that I did as well. So this portraiture, so as well as doing documentary, fine art, and newspaper photography, my specialism has always been my black and white printing. And as you know, I was a Ilford master printer, and I made prints for my fine art practice, which was landscape and street photography. But I decided that it would be a good idea to make black and white prints in the darkroom for social portraiture, because they're beautiful, because they feel special, they look special, they frame nicely, and they last forever. They're proper archival prints. It's expensive, so I charged a lot of money to do it. But and on wedding photography, it was just, although I did try and do some weddings on film, and in the early days I did quite a lot on film, and later on we did a few, and we charged a lot of money for it. It is a really expensive way to shoot a wedding. We normally on a wedding in those days, we shot it on digital for $3,000. If we shot it on film, it had to be doubled, and so not a lot of people would spend that money on wedding photography. On portraiture, though, you didn't take so many pictures, and you didn't have to make so many prints, so you could charge quite reasonable sums for portrait photography and still make quite good money and make really special prints. So we used to charge by the print for portrait photography. We used to charge a sitting fee, which was nominal, and then charged by the print. So on average, I suppose we used to take about £1,000 on a portrait session, and that would be by making 5 or 6 prints of different sizes. So portrait photography, social portrait photography is generally family portraits, usually children or complete family units. So mum, dad, a little baby, and older brother in this picture. Portrait photography traditionally was a studio based, but most portrait photographers worked in the studio. I did my portrait photography. I did do some studio portrait photography, but it was more popular for me to go to the client. So I'd go to their homes, or we'd go out somewhere and we'd make the portraits in a documentary, more of a documentary style. These are posed in that I've asked them to do what I've asked them to do, but they're fairly loosely posed. So he's much more influenced by what I did as a newspaper photographer, as a documentary photographer, and as a fine art photographer working with the black and white film and print material. This is now a much more popular way of making portrait photographs than the studio. A lot more photographers are working this way. They're calling it lifestyle portraiture. And this really is truly lifestyle. There's no faces in this. You wouldn't be able to recognise people. Even the dog's got his bum to the camera. But it's a true lifestyle picture. It's about the way they spend their Sundays or their off days. Going walking with the dog, taking the child with them, with their wellies on and their barbers on, and off through the countryside where they live. This is at the back of their house. And quite a typical lifestyle picture. Very popular as in this social photography scene. Okay, so there used to be a photographer, American photographer, well, Hawaiian actually, in the 70s called Rocky Gunn, who used to do seminars and workshops on how to run businesses in social photography. And he used to say there are pictures for show and there are pictures for dough. And this is definitely a picture for show. So as a newspaper photographer, as a documentary photographer, when I made a portrait, I didn't want people to smile. I didn't want big smiley pictures because they looked a bit false, I guess, not real, and didn't have the gravity that a picture of somebody not smiling would have. It's not popular though with customers to have their children looking not very happy. but I just think they just look like better pictures. So the pictures that I used to show in my website and in my shop window and things used to be more serious. That did bring people in. People did come in, but then when you showed them their pictures and you gave them a choice of their child looking like that or looking happy and smiley, they generally chose the one of them looking happy and smiley. So I had pictures for show and pictures for dough, and this is definitely a picture for show. So working in people's homes. So when you're working in people's homes, you're working with their environment. So this is their four-poster bed, which was all oak and antique and looking fantastic, and they're playing with the child on the bed, which was a great moment. And this is the same family that the little boy that I said was looking when he was looking a bit sullen. He's in this picture. He's the guy in the middle there, looking very different. And we made this picture as a bit of fun. So it's the whole family, all the kids, one, two, three, four kids, mum and dad, and a skeleton left over from Halloween. And I've gone outside and I shot them through the window. I've got them press up against the window. We've got reflections going on of the outside. So we try to make something interesting. We try to make pictures that say something about the people in them, the families. And this is another one of those moments. This is a great moment where we had the family lined up at the back of the room. We were going to make the picture with the little girl sat on the table, and I was going to pull the two chairs out that are with their backs to us, so we could make a picture with them all sitting around that table, which was an area of an extension that they just had built on their house and they were quite proud of. And then of course, she's a little girl and she just like came darting back towards the camera, or where I wasn't even ready to take the picture. I was just getting ready to take pictures. And she came running towards me with a big smile on her face, and all of them behind her are smiley as well. So I just turned and took the picture. She's in focus, they're out of focus. I think it's a great moment, and it was a popular picture with them, and they bought a 20-inch by 16-inch frame print, which was about 300 quid. And then this is a headshot of a small child, and it's not easy to get headshots of small children because they move quite a lot. He was sitting on a rocking horse, which he was rocking towards me. I was working with an 85mm lens wide open at f2, which means I had very little depth of field, which means that I had to wait until he was at the place where I'd pre-focused before I took the picture. And it is sharp. It's sharp on the nearest eye, which is his left eye, and it's not easy to take that sort of picture, but it was very popular. Again, they bought a 2016 of that one. And this is the same little girl that ran towards the camera as well. So I've asked her to look at. In fact, I think if I remember rightly, I got her dad to stand outside through the window, and so she was looking through the window at her dad. And I'm interested there in a reflection, obviously a profile and a reflection. And this is a family, three daughters, three girls. These are actually the great-granddaughters of Ben and Winifred Nicholson, the painters, famous painters. And this was on their parents' farm in Cumbria. They're all left home. They're all living different lives. One of them is an artist, like her grandparents, great grandparents. And one of them was a PhD student. I can't remember what the middle one did now, but they've got a lamb there. It's a black lamb, so it's hard to see, with a white stripe down its nose. But the one in the middle is holding the lamb, which is why she's in that position. That's why she's sitting down on the floor like that, because she's holding onto the lamb. But it was very popular. They spent a lot of money. Mum and Dad spent a lot of money on this portrait session. And we did all of the portraits of all three of them together. We didn't do any individual ones at all, and yet they bought lots of prints. Okay, so I hope that helps to give you a little introduction into my take on social photography, but I want you to do some research to find out what else you can find out about it.